This is The Binding of Isaac, made by Edmund Macmillan. It is a very fun game that I personally like to play. Let's take a moment to look at the way our character, Isaac, moves. He moves very smoothly and feels satisfying to play. Let's compare that to something like this. This is a game that I made personally. This is not as satisfying at all to play. It feels very sudden, unsmooth, and just not accurate. You can't perform precise movements in this second game. But what differentiates these two games from each other? Well, let's look into that. Let's go back to The Binding of Isaac and let's look at a closer level. Why is Isaac so damn smooth in his movement, huh? Well, when we look at the way Isaac moves, he doesn't actually reach full speed when the second I click the right button to move. Isaac accelerates to a maximum speed, but not instantly. And then when I release the button, Isaac again doesn't come to a halt instantly, but instead slows down gradually. Comparing that to my game, the second I click to move, the character reaches maximum speed, and the second I release, the character comes to a halt. The smoothness here is in the acceleration. In The Binding of Isaac, the acceleration is varying. It begins very large, then it fades out slowly until we reach constant velocity. In my game, there's basically no acceleration. There's just one huge spike of speed that suddenly hits our player, making him reach maximum velocity in basically a fraction of a second. The human brain likes more varying stuff instead of hard-hitting constants, which makes The Binding of Isaac more smooth in the perception of the brain. Now, there are of course other factors like better animation and more polish in The Binding of Isaac, but you get the point. Well, let's take a look at this graph. This graph is one of the most simplest graphs that we can have a look at. And this graph represents my game. Let's say that the y-axis here represents our speed. So the second I click the right arrow to move, my speed would simply be set to 2, and then the second I leave the right button, it would be set to 0 instantly. Very cooked shape, very ragged shape. It's just almost like a square. And there's no transition between anything. It's just I click the right arrow, he goes to speed 2, I release it, goes to 0. It's very simple and not smooth, and that's what creates this unsmoothness in the feeling of the game. Now, a graph of something more like this would be more representative of The Binding of Isaac. This graph uses a function of the log function. Now, the log function has some very interesting properties, and the biggest one here that game developers use is how if you graph it, it's a very smooth function. How it curves and it starts off very quickly, then it starts to flatter. So this can be more representative of The Binding of Isaac. When you click the right arrow button, you start off accelerating very quickly, but then you start to flatten. And then, when you leave the button, same thing but in reverse, you start to slow down until you reach 0. Now, of course, the logarithmic function could continue on forever, but of course, video game developers can limit this just like I do here. Can limit the values of y and x to a certain point. And video game developers do the same thing. They can round certain values to make the game actually playable, because if there's no limits put upon the game, then the character could move in just infinitely small increments which would just be a huge waste of memory, and it also would feel way smoother. And so this curve, in comparison to this very square shape, this curve makes the game feel way smoother to play, and that's the main reason that makes The Binding of Isaac feel way more smooth to play than something like my game here. So in summary, video game developers use the logarithmic function to model player movement and make it more smooth because of the properties of the logarithmic function, and how it is more smooth and flattens over time, and the normal function, like a normal linear function, this would be called a linear function, it just moves directly and there's no smoothness factor in it. So that's how Edward Macmillan makes his game feel more smooth to play. Thank you guys for watching.